So, what is your name and pronouns?
My name's Aadarsh and I use they them pronouns.
Actually, where were you born?
I was born in Fiji in a little town called Lautoka Hospital, and I was raised for my early childhood in Fiji in a little village called Yalandro.
When did you come to Australia then?
Uh, my family and I, we migrated to Australia properly when I was 4.5 years old. We'd visited once before that, but we properly migrated when I was 4.5.
And you live in Western Sydney now?
Yes, I live in southwest Sydney in a little place called Yanora.
Nice. Do you have a religious background?
I do have quite a religious background. My dad is a Hindu priest, and he is an active practicer of Hinduism. So is my entire family and extended family. We're quite religious. We have a temple in our backyard. It's quite a important and integral part of my family life, being Hindu and being religious. Myself personally, I don't feel like I am religious. I'm culturally Hindu, and I do take on the practices of my family for their sake. Do I believe in the religion? Maybe not.
When did you start to come to this, like realizing that you yourself don't as much believe in Hinduism and everything?
I think I was quite religious up until I was in my late adolescence. Even like 15, 16, I was still quite religious. I started coming to terms with my sexuality alongside my religion. And it was that like sexuality, gender identity, questioning with my religion that actually sort of solidified my uh, belief in cultural Hinduism and realizing that there are parts of Hinduism that do agree with my sexuality and my gender identity. And I'm going to take those parts. It's the practice of the institutional religion that I don't want. And so it was at that point where I distanced myself from the religion of Hinduism, but accepted myself and the culture of Hinduism a lot more.
You kind of touched on it then, and I should have asked the question at the beginning. You are queer. Do you identify as any part of the queer, like gay, or do you just prefer to go by queer?
I broadly like to say I'm queer, and I do sometimes like to give nuance to that if necessary. Usually, I tend to say that I'm pansexual and gender fluid. It's just the two labels that best fit my identity, although I don't think it encompasses my identity in its entirety.
I agree. Um, so in Western Sydney, is there a large Hindu community that you've grown up around, and that you're still part of?
Yes, there's definitely a large Hindu community that I've grown up around. Like as a child, I used to go to temples. There used to be like festivals and things that I still do go to and have been going to since I was very young. There are religious carnivals that go on in like Liverpool. There's a thing called the Diwali Mela. In Blacktown, there's a lot of similar things in Parramatta. Like I grew up going to like the temple quite regularly. We have a temple in our backyard, but right near where my brother works in Austral, there's the largest Hindu temple in the southern hemisphere. And I've been there a lot of times. I've preached there. I've done speeches at that temple. Like as a son of a priest, it's something that I've partaken in quite a lot.
Cool. So being queer is how has your family reacted to this?
Um, so my, I think there's been a lot of different reactions from different parts of my family. One of my brothers and a lot of my cousins are quite accepting while not understanding, and it's one of those things where it's like oh, you're taken for being this part of my family, and I don't understand your sexuality and gender identity, but I'll accept it because that's fine. The more important part of my community and my family, like my parents, haven't been quite great with it. I was actually outed by one of my brothers to my parents, and that didn't turn out very well.
So your parents have unfortunately forced you to undergo conversion therapy. Um, how how did this come about?
So conversion therapy wasn't a thing that I had thought my parents would consider, even in like my like deepest darkest dreams about them finding out my sexuality. I so how it came up was um, I was kicked out of home for a little while, and then I started living back with them or on an irregular basis, and they wrote me a letter, and in the letter they had like done some research, and I think this is a letter that they wouldn't have written up themselves. They would have gotten it from the conversion therapist, about this person who takes a scientific approach to curing homosexuality, and he himself was once gay and now no longer is, and there's scientific evidence behind it, blah blah blah. And so they gave me that letter and this document that they were like, if you read this document and then summarize the document, we'll give you money in return for that. Um, and so it was brought up in that way. I refused to do the document, but I did say that I will meet with someone. And so that was, so they were like, okay, fine. Instead of doing the document, you can have regular meetings with a conversion therapist. Um, yeah.
Um, so the conversion therapist is someone from the Hindu community outside.
Yeah, so the conversion therapist isn't somebody from the Hindu community. My parents wanted to do something secular because they could see that this wasn't like me trying to go against the religion. I still practice Hinduism with them. And so for them, this wasn't a me doing it as, no, I'm not Hindu. It's me doing it as, like, I don't know, just a completely different, separate thing. And so they thought the best way to target it would be bringing in somebody who identifies like in a secular way and uses science as his like tool for conversion.
Can I ask what takes place in the conversion therapy?
You can. A lot of it is like what it feels like is going to a counseling session. My first session was quite intimidating actually, because it was usually these happen at night. Usually he comes over to my place and I don't know his name. Or I do know his name. I don't know his full name. He identifies as John, and I know him just as John. Um, and we sit in like our living room with most of the lights except for one light on, um, and it's a talk for the most part. Um, in our first session, what he did was he went on, and looking back at it, I couldn't see what he was doing, but now looking back at it, I can see that his whole point was to try to get into my head in an emotional way, and so we spoke about things, and every like 5 minutes his emotion would change about how he was trying to do this. So he started off being really kind and really compassionate, and then he went to anger, and then he had like 5 minutes of being angry at me, and then 5 minutes of being sad at me, and like changing his emotions up and seeing which ones I reacted to the most. And I think that's kind of how he has taken on um, trying to like speak to me now. So every time he wants to elicit like a reaction from me, he'll know what emotions hit where, and and so usually when we talk or we do things, he if he wants a reaction from me, he will pick up an emotion that he noticed in the first session I reacted to.
During the session, you say that it happens as a conversation. So, are you willing to be there as the conversion therapy is taking place?
I see. Here's the thing. I think the question of if I want to be there, or like the autonomy of physically being there is something that is a bit of an issue when it comes to the issue of conversion therapy as a whole. A large part of the argument is if you're 18 years old, you can do whatever you want and choose to practice any form of medical care that you choose to. Unfortunately, this is one of those situations where I can say, yes, I will sit in here. Do I want to be here? No. And the consequences of me not being here are like severely outweigh the consequences of me being at a conversion therapy session. Like me sitting through 2 hours of grueling mental, emotional labor compared to being homeless is like, it's a difficult thing to balance, but it seems more logical to go through the 2 hours of emotional labor than being homeless for a month.
As the conversion therapy is taking place, do you believe what is happening? Like, do you, yeah.
Yeah. I I think it's one of those things where in the moment I'm like, oh yeah, like this makes sense, and there's a lot of skewed logic to it um, that need time to sit through and break down. It tends to be very fast paced, and I think that's how he how he gets into people's heads. Um, like this whole point of trying to connect dots without letting me try to break those illogical connections is part of it. And so after that 2 hours, I feel very emotionally drained, and I usually sleep, and I usually have a day off. But that day off, I will think about everything that happened, and I'll try to like untangle those knots and be like, this is why what you said here is not correct, is not true, is not practical. Um, and yeah, so like in the moment, I'm like, oh, this makes sense. This, yeah, I completely get it. And I believe it for the hottest of seconds. But then looking away from it, I'm able to decipher why that was bullshit.
I like that.
Yeah.
Decipher why it's bullshit.
Yeah.
You don't have to answer this question, but of those knots that you're untangling, are you able to like explain like some of the things that he may say to you? But I understand if you don't want to answer this because I'm making you like go back to that. So like it's completely fine.
Can I think about this?
Yeah, that's of course. Okay,
Okay,
perfectly
cool.
fine. Okay, no, let me ask this first. How many sessions have you been to? About.
I've probably been to about anywhere between 5 to 8 sessions now.
After these 5 to 8 sessions, or even after like the first sessions, in any of your situations that you've been in, have you reacted differently because of the conversion therapy? Like thought, oh no, this is wrong.
Like, thought what he told me was wrong?
No. Like, so he's told you something, and then you've been in a situation where you're about to like, this is horribly worded, but like be gay, and you've been like, oh no, this is wrong. I shouldn't do this.
Yes. Like I have. There's so many parts of like. I think a lot of it is like he's tapping into my already internalized homophobia, is what it is. And so I have times where I'm like, oh, I'm about to go talk to a guy, and then I'm like, oh shit, this is not okay. And I realize that I've been doing that actually more since going to conversion therapy. I used to be quite a lot more okay with my sexuality and my expression of it, or even the consequences of my expression of it. So like maybe not going up and talking to someone, but after sleeping with someone, after talking to someone, thinking about why that was so bad and why I shouldn't be doing that. So I can definitely see it taking a toll in my practice of my queerness. Yeah.
The internalized homophobia that you mentioned, do you think that comes from more of a place within yourself, or more of a place within how you were raised in like a Hindu family?
I think it's definitely a mix of both. Like, I am the consequence of being raised by my. I am a consequence of being raised by my Hindu family, um, and and the environment I grew up in, the people I associated with throughout schooling life, um, the the things I was taught by like my brothers, all of it is part of what makes me me and what adds to my internalized homophobia. Um, yeah, it's a whole lot of processes of learning hatred that I grew up with.
I didn't really have any more questions. Do you have anything that you want to say?
Um, Not right now, but I might answer your not question soon.